questions, I'll just jump right in. We're in the modern period now. So we're leaving the medieval, we're leaving the classical era. We're going into what's called the modern period. And this word modern, using the word modern to describe this time period is something that's unique to philosophy, right? When we talk about modern art, we're not talking about some people in the 1600s and the 1700s who are writing, okay? We're talking about probably early 1900s of modern art. But alas, in philosophy, this period is known as the modern period. Some people call it the Age of Enlightenment, right? The first major figure, by many standards, some might disagree with that, but one of the first major figures is Descartes, the one who we're going to be reading today. He dies in 1650, okay? So when you think modern and philosophy, think about that time period, 17th, 18th century in Europe, okay? Now, during this period, the focus seems to be on epistemology. I think that what we've been looking at so far in the medieval period and the classical period, they were focusing primarily on metaphysics. That was the primary concern. They were doing ethics, they were doing epistemology, but it seemed like Plato, Aristotle, when they were at their best, when they were doing the best philosophy, the highest philosophy, they were doing metaphysics. That was what was pertinent, right? Explaining the universe, explaining reality in these terms. In the modern period, the turn goes from metaphysics towards epistemology. Does anybody remember what this word means from the first day of class? One of those branches of philosophy. So we have metaphysics, which deals with reality, the nature of reality. We've got ethics, dealing with
knowledge.
Oh, good, right. So epistemology is dealing with knowledge, issues having to do with knowledge. What is knowledge, right? How do I define it? What counts as knowledge and what doesn't, right? Those sort of things. How might I justify knowledge claims? And when we get to Descartes, we'll see, we have to deal with maybe the skeptical dilemma. Can I even know anything, right, would be the question to ask. So during this time period, epistemology was of main concern to these philosophers, and there tended to be these two answers to the question of how do we know what we know? For the rationalists, all of our knowledge originates in our ability to reason, right? In our capacity for rational thought, hence the term rationalism. And so Descartes is no exception. We'll see today when we get to the reading what sort of argument he provides for this, right? Knowledge begins, knowledge is gained through reason, through rationality. Not, as the empiricists would claim, through the senses, right? Someone like Locke, Berkeley, Hume, they're going to say that knowledge needs the senses. It begins with our sensual, with our empirical experience. Of course, our reason and our rationality does something with these inputs, but if the inputs weren't there, there would be no knowledge, right? So just to sort of recap, rationalists believe that knowledge originates in reason, rational thought. The empiricists, knowledge originates in the senses, right? In our experience of the world around us, okay? Well, before we get into the Descartes reading, I'd like to do some setting up here, give you a little historical context, and maybe we can understand why the concern was not so much for metaphysics, but the turn was to epistemology. During this time period, this is the time of the scientific revolution. Descartes had lived through most of this. He was familiar with these three figures, and so we need to know a little bit about each of them. Some of you, I think most of you, I think perhaps all of you, I hope all of you, are at least familiar with the name of Galileo Galilei. But what about Copernicus, the first name on the board? Is anyone familiar with Copernicus?
Do like astronomy stuff.
He was an astronomer, yeah, but people talk about the Copernican revolution. What was so revolutionary about his ideas? What's that? That's Kepler. Right, so keep off on the orbits for now. Right, the Earth was not in the center. And when I read the textbook for the first time here, I learned something, and I don't know where he got this from, because on Wikipedia it says something different. But you know, you can't really trust Wikipedia either, but I've always been taught that Copernicus proposed this heliocentric view of the universe, right? So what does that mean, heliocentric?
Sun.
The sun is in the middle, right? What was the prevailing view at the time, not a heliocentric, but Earth, right? A geocentric view. And according to Melcher, that's not entirely correct. Copernicus never said that the sun was in the middle. All he said was that the Earth moves, or possibly it could move, right? And so if the Earth's moving, even if it is at the center, it's not always at the center, right? So with Copernicus's theories, with his book on the heavenly bodies, he publishes like on his deathbed too. He knows that what he's doing is very controversial. Copernicus opens the way for a heliocentric model of the universe. So, and this is helpful, I think, theoretically for astronomers, because so far they've been dealing with the geocentric view of the universe. So what we've got Earth right here in the middle, and the most sophisticated model that we had was Ptolemy's model. There's this astronomer Ptolemy, and so he proposed, this diagram of all the heavenly bodies. You've got Earth in the middle, and then all these other celestial bodies that orbit it. You've got the sort of Mars and the Moon, and then the Sun, and all these other things that are going around. But this simple picture didn't quite work. For one thing, they all thought that the orbits of the planets, and even the Sun, although it doesn't have an orbit, they thought that they moved in perfect circles. Why did they think that?
They didn't know any better.
They didn't know any better, plus they didn't read too much Aristotle, right? Aristotle kind of convinced them. Right? We noticed how in the medieval period, Aristotle's influence started to rise, especially when the church started conducting science. So they're arguing, Aristotle would argue, divine things, like the stars and the planets, they're divine, they're up there, they're divine. They're perfect, they're divine, and so what sort of movements would they make? They'd have to make circular movements. Why? Because the circle's perfect, or something like that. It's kind of this weird reasoning. So you've got perfect circles, but Ptolemy said, yeah, I kind of agree, but that doesn't really work. I tried using that, and I couldn't predict where Mars was going to be in the sky. So Ptolemy comes up with what he called epicycles, right? So let's say this is Mars. In order to account for its placement in the sky, we come up with these epicycles. So it goes in a circle, but every once in a while, there's like a little orbit within an orbit, right? Mars will just do a little loop-de-loop here, and then when it gets there, it does another loop-de-loop, and then another loop-de-loop, right? And it started getting more and more complicated and very messy, and it still wasn't a perfect model. We couldn't use it to predict where stars would be or where the planets would be and all this. When Copernicus opens the door for a heliocentric model, this changes things, right? No longer do we have Earth at the middle, but now it's the sun, right? And then now it's like an eyeball. When Kepler comes along, though, what is his contribution to the discussion? How does he change things? What does he theorize? Perhaps
elliptical orbits.
Precisely, right? Perhaps they are not perfect circles. Perhaps the planets move around in elliptical orbits. So that's the contribution we get from Kepler. You put these two together, you put Copernicus and Kepler together, and wow, you've actually got a pretty effective model of the universe that works pretty well for predictions, and all these sort of things. So this looks really good, but what's the problem? Well, does this go with the popular view of the church? No, the church feels threatened by these new theories, right? And Galileo was a member of the church. He was conducting science under the auspices of the church. But he wrote a book where he kind of defends Copernican views and Keplerian views. How does that work out for Galileo? Yeah, well, he has to meet with the Spanish or the Roman Inquisition. He's put under house arrest for pretty much the rest of his life. And he's excommunicated from the church, right? What does that mean if I'm excommunicated from the church? You're not going to heaven, right? You are damned to hell for eternity, right? So poor Galileo, right? He's damned to hell for eternity just for supporting these views, which he thought were a lot more sensible than Aristotle's views. Not only did he challenge the old Aristotelian astronomy, but that astronomy was based on Aristotelian physics, and he also challenged that. Remember we were talking about how Aristotle thought that heavy things just fell to the center of the earth and light things just go out. Well, Galileo starts to at least lay the groundwork for a new conception of gravity, right? Aristotle thought if something's heavier, it's going to fall faster, right? And that seems kind of commonsensical, and usually if you just look at things in nature, they seem to do that. But Galileo said that no, it's not their weight that makes them fall faster. It's the resistance or lack thereof, right? And so he's the first to sort of lay the ground for, excuse me, for what would become Newtonian physics. So he's challenging all sorts of views, not just in astronomy, but also in physics in general. And again, this doesn't really work out very well for him. He gets excommunicated from the church, right? He's banished from heaven forever. But it's okay because what is it? The Second Vatican Council in the 60s, they forgave Galileo, and now they let him back in, right? He's been, I don't know what you call it when you're recommunicated or something like this, right? I can just imagine Galileo, on the rack in hell, burning. Here comes St. Peter, Hey, man, sorry, we made a mistake. You're actually on the list, man. Geez, thanks, Yeah, 600 years later, thanks a lot, right? So they've forgiven Galileo since then, right? But he was a threat. At least they saw him as one to the church, and he was a heretic, right? Why is that such a big deal, though? I mean, come on. So what? We're not in the center. So what? Planets don't go in perfect circles.
Is that kind of challenge, does God care about us?
Right. It's not just that, a lot of these church figures had spent years arguing that, look, in the Bible it says this, and look, Aristotle said it too, so it must be true. Wow, isn't that great? Not only did it challenge it, but it also seemed to kind of demote us, right? There's something special, perhaps, about being in the middle. I guess that's where the expression, you think you're the center of the universe, comes from, right? We actually literally did think that we were the center of the universe. And that, I don't know, maybe that's kind of stupid, if you're on the right or the left or up or down, you're not as important as if you're in the middle. I don't know, you're the focal point. But that was the perception, right? That we're somehow not as special. The universe is more vast than it ever has been before. Galileo also improved the telescope quite a bit, right? So we really were aware of how vast we started to become aware of how vast the universe really was. And so all of these things that were taken as just bedrock certainties, you can't challenge them. Not only are they revealed in our holy book, but even the philosopher Aristotle supports these ideas. So they gotta be right. These start to be challenged. But this is not the only challenge to the church that is going on during this time period. Something besides just the scientific revolution. What other sort of revolutionary activities, I don't know if I want to use the word revolutionary, but what sort of challenges did the church have to face during this time? During the 1500s, 1600s, early 1700s. Something within the church itself. I mean, I guess these scientists were doing work for the church, some of them. Martin Luther and stuff like that, yes. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. What was Martin Luther and stuff like that?
Challenges to the church's, ethics and stuff.
Exactly. So you don't just get a challenge to the worldview or the cosmology, as you might put it, the explanation of the cosmos. Not only is the cosmology being challenged, but the ethics of the church. Specifically what, though? What did Martin Luther not approve of? What sort of practices was the church involved in that he did not approve of in his 95 Theses? There's 95 of them. You can think of one?
It's kind of weird, though.
Oh, Martin Luther was kind of weird, though, I guess you could say. He seemed to be, at least in his early life, he seemed to be obsessed with salvation, right? He was worried whether he'd be saved or not, right? Am I doing right? Am I a good Christian? Am I a bad Christian? I want to be good.
Is it predestination?
He eventually comes up with the notion of predestination and chills out. Oh, I'm saved, it's okay. God chose it, so I better not be worried about it. But in his early life, he was actually, from the biography I read from him, it seemed like he was kind of paranoid about this at first. In fact, when the head of the church in Württemberg asked him to be the head of the theology department and teach all these new priests the gospel, He thought, that's just too much, it's overwhelming, that's too much of a task, I'll die trying to do it. And the guy says, good, then you'll get closer to God sooner if you die trying, so do it, right? And he did, and this sort of backfired, I think, because he actually read the text very closely, studied the Bible inside and out, and he started realizing, wait a minute, some of the things the church is teaching me aren't in this book. Like what? What are some of the things that the church was doing, some of the practices that they were doing, that Luther was having a problem with?
Is it that you don't have to go through a priest to communicate with God?
One thing, right, yeah. How did you pray? You didn't, right? Your priest prayed for you, right? How dare you think that you could talk to God? An official of the church has to do it, one of his representatives. So yeah, that was one of the things, yeah.
One thing, I can't remember what it was called. The church was going around with these, saying that, you're...
Indulgences? Is that what you're thinking about?
That's exactly what it is.
So indulgences, what were those exactly? What were they doing? They're going around and...
They're going around and saying, if you're going to hell, you can pay us a certain amount of money and get you.
Right, and sometimes even if you weren't damned to hell, there's this idea of purgatory, right? And when you die, you have to kind of stay in purgatory for a while until your sins are cleansed, then you can go up to heaven. They would do all sort of tricky things, like, let's say your cousin died last week, right? They'd go to your house and they'd be like, hey man, I heard your cousin Fred just died. And he was walking out of a brothel right before a whorehouse. He went to the whorehouse about 2 days before he died. And he never went to communion, he never went to confession. So he's going to be in purgatory for a long time, unless, let's pull out our little sin calculator here. If you give us 2,000 gold pieces, I bet we can get your cousin out of purgatory in no time at all. You don't want him to wait. You love your cousin, don't you? So, right? And of course you could pay for your own sins too. That was what most people did, right? So I heard you committed adultery with this woman, and you stole some bread from the marketplace, and you did all these mean things, and you coveted your neighbor's wife. Okay, that's going to be, get a sin calculator and figure out how much to charge, right? So pay as you go sort of system, right? Pay to play kind of system. And Luther was like, what? Where does it say anything about that in the Bible? It doesn't, right? So that was one thing, right? The nature of prayer. And how, can I talk directly to God? Can I pray directly to God? Luther thought you could. What else, though? There's some other things. Yeah, Melissa.
He also didn't like the fact that nobody could read the Bible themselves. They had to go to church and listen to them.
Good, and that's important. And also, when they read the Bible, what language were they reading it in? In Latin, right? Which is kind of weird because it wasn't written in Latin, right? It was, the Old Testament is mainly Hebrew, Aramaic, right? And the New Testament's pretty much just all Greek, right? Sort of common Greek. Not very academic Greek, but it's Greek nonetheless. So they translated to what they call the Latin Vulgate. And so the Latin Vulgate is supposed to be some miracle translation, I think, is sort of how they justify it being the Orthodox version, right? Apparently, like 700 people translated it, and it was all the same translation or something like that. They said the same thing about the King James Bible, too. But I don't buy it. But still, this was it. You got to read it in Latin. No, you don't read it in Latin, sorry. The priests read it in Latin, and they'll transmit the truth of it to you. Luther didn't like this. Luther was one of the first to actually translate the Bible into a common language, right? In fact, he helped develop the German language because of this, right? The same is kind of true of Muhammad, right? I mean, Arabic, right, is, well, I wouldn't say Muhammad, but whoever got the Quran together, right, put the Quran together, it led to a unified language, right, an Arabic language. Same thing with German, right, the way Martin Luther used German. There's all the Low German, the High German, these different types of German that are being taught, that are being spoken colloquially. He made a uniform German language. So all of his theological contributions aside, just that alone is pretty significant, right? But so he's challenging the church, right? He's challenging this idea that only the priests can talk to God, only the priests can read the Bible, that the Bible can't be translated into just a normal language for normal uneducated people to just pick up and read and learn about it on their own. He did a lot of things, but another, how about marriage for priests? Can't get married if you're a priest, or have to be celibate. What did Luther think about that? Didn't like it, right? He wanted to have a wife, and he thought there were no problems with that, even if you were a pastor or whatever you want to call the Protestant version of the priest, right? So Martin Luther, right? Most people don't know this, or when they hear the story of Martin Luther, they don't realize he didn't really think of what, when he went to the church in Württemberg and he posted the 95 Theses on the door of the church. He didn't really think that he was going to start such a big mess, right? He didn't think it was going to cause such a ruckus, right? In fact, this was the traditional way that you brought up theological issues. You would post them on the church door, and then all the fathers and the priests would come together and they would discuss it, right? That's not what happened, though, when he put his 95 Theses on the church door in Württemberg. This began the Protestant Revolution, right? And the Reformation had to sort of deal with that, right, in the Catholic Church. So this is the historical context that we're dealing with when we get to Descartes, right? He lived through a lot of this, right, most of this. So he saw a lot of these worldviews that had been taken as absolutely certain start to be challenged. They begin to be challenged, and I suppose rightfully so. Obviously, the Copernican model of the universe is much better than the Ptolemaic model of the universe. But this also leaves us with a big problem, right? So far, what we've been doing, whatever method that we've been using to figure out these answers to these scientific questions, somehow it's been wrong. We've been going about it the wrong way. So why do you think maybe the turn goes away from metaphysics and towards epistemology?
With all these bedrock things being shaken out, the nature of knowing things is now under question.
Right, that's the focus, right? So like you said, the bedrock or the foundation of our knowledge has been destroyed pretty much, right? Has been challenged. So now we've got to reestablish those foundations and make sure we're not on such shaky ground, right? We have to come up with a much more certain methodology, a scientific method, right? This is when our modern view of those scientific methods starts to become, come to fruition, right? You see it in the works of Descartes. Before him, a guy named Francis Bacon. They were all worried about, how do you conduct science and how do you do scientific research and avoid the problems that we've had in the past. So Descartes, I'm not going to say a whole lot about him, the person. He's kind of an odd, eccentric character. Very frail man, but also very smart. I think that his metaphysics, when we get to it and we talk about it, it's quite problematic. Maybe not even that impressive, really. Some might even say that it's silly. I know there's a Leibniz scholar over at UH. He's one of the best Leibniz scholars in the country, and he just doesn't get why people make such a fuss about Descartes. He really thinks Descartes was a really bad philosopher. I don't think that harshly of Descartes. I think he was actually a pretty brilliant man, and he was just dealing with some pretty difficult problems. Now, he was also probably more well-known as a mathematician, right? I mean, if you've ever taken a class, college algebra, or just, some basic algebra classes, and you've graphed a function, right? Have anybody graphed a function on the XY coordinate? Well, you can thank Descartes for that, right? So that's why they often call this, the XY, this is the Cartesian plane. You'll often hear that referred to as this, right? So as a mathematician, as a geometer, I think unquestionably the guy was brilliant and very influential, and he set the groundwork for calculus. So if we didn't have Descartes and his analytical geometry, Isaac Newton and Leibniz would not have been able to formulate their calculus. And you're thinking, well, I don't like calculus. Why should I thank Descartes for that, right? Well, look at all the buildings and structures and skyscrapers around you, right? Those were built by engineers who were using these calculus formulas, right, to do this sort of thing, right? So a lot of our technology, a lot of our industry, right, can sort of be traced back to, what might just seem like these guys were just, he's just an intellectual doing math problems and thinking about abstract things, right? But in the end, I think some of his insights became very practical in application. So let's talk a little bit about the reading, though, okay? Descartes' Meditations. This is an interesting reading because It's not as systematic, I think, as Descartes' other works. If you read his other works, he's a very systematic thinker. He sets things out as almost like a mathematician would, right? Starts with these basic axioms, derives other truths from his axioms in a very systematic procedure. The Meditations is a much more free-flowing piece of work, right? He's just sitting there thinking about these problems that he's been faced with, right? And just going where his mind will take him. And it takes him pretty far, but it also leaves much room for doubt. Now, let's get here to the read. What page we got here? This is 400 and maybe late
340s.
38. I think it starts at
338. Yes. Let's just read the very first paragraph of the first meditation, where he's just kind of establishing the mood, and he's also telling us what he's setting out to do here. What is his object in this writing? So he writes here at the beginning, it's on page 338. For several years now, I've been aware that I accepted many falsehoods as true in my youth, and that what I built on the foundation of those falsehoods was dubious, and accordingly, that once in my life, I would need to tear down everything and begin anew from the foundations if I wanted to establish any stable and lasting knowledge. But the task seemed enormous, and I waited until I was so old that no better time for undertaking it would be likely to follow. I have thus delayed so long that it would be wrong for me to waste in indecision the time left for action. Today then, having rid myself of worries and having arranged for some peace and quiet, I withdraw alone, free at last, earnestly and wholeheartedly to overthrow all of my beliefs. So he's saying here, I've been waiting for the perfect time to do this. When I was as educated as I'm going to be, I'm not going to get any smarter. When I'm still not too old, and I'm still sharp, and I still have my wits, I think this is the time to do it. But what is it? What is he setting out to do?
Pretty much tear down everything.
Right, this is pretty radical. To overthrow all of my beliefs, everything I believe, I'm going to throw it all away and start from the beginning. But how does he do this? How does he proceed? Second paragraph. To do this, I don't need to show that each of them, my beliefs, to be false. I may never be able to do that. But since reason now convinces me that I ought to withhold my assent just as carefully from what isn't obviously certain and indubitable as from what's obviously false, I can justify the rejection of all my beliefs if in each case I can find some ground for doubt. And to do this, I need not run through my beliefs one by one, which would be an endless task, since a building collapses when its foundation is cut from under it. I will go straight to the principles on which all of my former beliefs rested. Okay, so he's doing a couple things here in that paragraph, right? One, he's talking about his method. How is he going to do this? How am I going to overthrow all my old beliefs? Am I going to go one by one and look at them all? Well, no. Then what is he going to do? Look at the foundations, right? Challenge the foundations of his belief. If he can show that there's a room for doubt there, then all the subsequent beliefs will fall as well. Like the house of cards tumbles. So that's one thing he's presenting us with here in the second paragraph. But another thing he's doing is he's setting up a pretty high standard for what he's going to accept as true. What is he going to accept as knowledge? He says, and I'll repeat what I just read, reason now convinces me that I ought to withhold my assent just as carefully from what isn't obviously certain and indubitable as from what's obviously false. So apparently there's some knowledge to him, or some beliefs to him are obviously false. But there's some other ones that are just not absolutely certain. Okay? He's going to treat those as if they're the same. Right? I'm not going to believe it if it's not certain. Pretty high standard for knowledge, right? it's not absolutely certain, I'm going to reject it. I'm not just going to reject the things that are obviously wrong. I'm also going to reject the things that aren't obviously certain, and as he puts it, indubitable, unable to be questioned, right? So again, a pretty high standard for knowledge, and we'll see in a minute this might come back to bite him on the rear, right? Maybe this is too high of a standard, right? But where does he start? He says, okay, so I'm going to attack the foundations of my beliefs. Who's his first target, or what is his first target? What does he say? All the things I've based my beliefs on so far came from where? Next paragraph. What does it say in the next paragraph?
Census.
The census. Okay, so these are the first, this is the first victim of Descartes' method, right? Here's the first candidate. Let's see, my census. Okay. A lot of what I believe so far was based on my senses. How does he put it here? Whatever I've so far accepted as supremely true, I've learned either from the senses or through the senses. But what about the senses, though? Remember, can we be absolutely certain about what our senses tell us? Can we? No, why not?
Because people feel different
Because
things.
people sense things differently than,
Okay, so I might not have an objective way of seeing things. Like if I'm watching the Green Bay Packers versus Seattle or whatever, and one of the refs says that the guy had the ball and the other, right? So they just were perceiving it differently or something like this. Their perception was skewed. But how else do our senses deceive us though? I mean, not always, do they? But I mean, there's sometimes it's pretty obvious that they do, that we see things that aren't really there.
Lucid states, I guess.
When you're tripping on acid like I thought he was when I was reading this.
Yeah, I could see you thinking that, right? This guy's tripping, he's smoking some opium, I don't know what he's doing, right? But he's meditating. He's meditating, right? That's probably why everybody thinks that philosophers are just a bunch of stoners.
Yeah, it's right somewhere.
Yeah. But the senses, how do they deceive us? In what way? We talked about this when we were going to Plato, remember? Optical illusions, things like that. Right? If I'm looking far away on a hot day, I see some water on the ground, it's not really there. So obviously our senses deceive us in those cases. But do they always deceive us? Let's read this next paragraph here. While my senses may deceive me about what is small or far away, there may still be other things that I take in by the senses that I cannot possibly doubt. Like that I'm here, that I'm sitting before the fire, wearing a dressing gown, touching this paper. And on what grounds might I deny that my hands and the other parts of my body exist? Unless perhaps I'm liken myself to madmen whose brains are so rattled by persistent vapors of melancholy that they're sure they're kings when in fact they're paupers, or that they wear purple robes when in fact they're naked. So I'm not a nut, I'm not crazy, I'm not on acid, right? So I can trust that I'm sitting here, right? I'm writing this meditation and before the fire, right? Well, no, he says, but yeah.
Then he start believing that maybe he could be dreaming.
Right, that's what he says in the next paragraph. So let's read further. He says, so it seems like I can be certain that I'm sitting here writing, but this would be perfectly obvious if I weren't a man accustomed to sleeping at night, whose experiences while asleep are at least as far-fetched as those that madmen have while they're awake. How often at night I've been convinced that I was here sitting before the fire, wearing my dressing gown, when in fact I was undressed between the covers of my bed. But now I'm looking at this piece of paper with my eyes wide open. The head that I'm shaking has not been lulled to sleep. I put my hand out consciously and deliberately, and I feel. None of this would be so distinct if I were asleep. As if I can't remember having been tricked by similar thoughts while I was asleep. When I think very carefully about this, I see so plainly that there are no reliable signs by which I can distinguish sleeping from waking that I'm stupefied. In my stupor itself suggests that I am asleep. So now he's starting to think about this. He's like, well, wait a minute. Don't I have dreams where I think I'm doing something just normal? You ever had these dreams where you go to work dreams. I worked at Whole Foods for like almost 9 years, and I still have Whole Foods dreams. And I don't know why I don't just click. I don't work here anymore. Sometimes in the dream I even address the problem. I'm like, wait a minute, how did I get hired back? I'm supposed to be on the blacklist, right? I'm not on good terms with the company, right? Your friend or your buddy did some things and pulled some strings for you, and you got in, you got a new job here, I figure it out in the dream how this works. And I never realized that it is a dream till I wake up, right? I really think that it's real. And that's a very mundane dream. I mean, there's nothing wacky about it. I just go to work, imagine you woke up right now and you still haven't left for school yet, right? Imagine you go through your whole shift at work, an 8-hour shift, and then you wake up and it was just a dream and you got to go up and go to your shift. That would really suck, right? You were going to say something? Or?
Yeah, no, the day before the test, I had a dream at like 4 o'clock in the morning that I woke up late for the test.
Yeah. No, I've had that happen to me too.
I turned my alarm clock off and everything, and then I wake up at 5 and I was like, oh wait, I'm still at my house.
No, I've had dreams where I was, I don't know how it felt so real because the dream took a whole semester. Like, I signed up for a class and I just didn't show up to it. Like, I forgot that I signed up for it until like the last 3 weeks, and then I just showed up. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm like, wait, how could that time lapse not have like thrown me off? And this is obviously a dream, right? You don't dream about a whole semester in 12 minutes, But I didn't. And that's another point he makes is, even in dreams when I have crazy dreams that are nuts, that aren't like real life, I'm fooled into thinking they are. Right? I'm walking down the street and the dog talks to me. Where's the grocery store? Oh, it's around the corner, doggy. I see it. I'm not like, wait, dog is talking? What? So I can't distinguish between my dreams and my waking state, says Descartes. And so, heck, for all I know, I could be dreaming right now. Right? It's like the old Taoist sage, Chuangzi, right? Having the dream that he's a butterfly, right? Am I having a dream that I'm a butterfly? Or am I a butterfly having a dream that I'm Chuangzi? Which one is the reality here?
It's like the movie The Sixth Sense.
I haven't ever seen that, though. But, yeah, it's what that guy, what's his name?
Bruce Willis?
Not the director, that you can't pronounce his name. Yeah, Olajuwon, whatever his name. Shyamalan. Olajuwon is a basketball player. M. Night Shyamalan. Yes, right. I just think his other movies are crap. Hey, if you like them, I'm sorry. But I've heard The Sixth Sense is really good, though. I've heard it's good, but I did not like, what is The Village, and what was the other one with Mark Wahlberg. I just did not like that. Forgot what it was called.
Science was good, though.
I don't know, they just seem so cheesy. It's just like, they're all like, oh, weird, mysterious, and then a twist ending, But I heard, and I haven't seen Signs, but I heard Sixth Sense is pretty good. But why are you mentioning The Sixth Sense though?
Because you go through the whole movie thinking he's helping this little boy and he's helping this little boy,
Yeah.
when in reality at the end, well, I don't want to spoil it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Don't tell me the twist ending if I ever see it, right? But good. So we're tricked about what is real, what is a dream. We can't know for sure.
Inception.
What's that? Inception. I've never seen it, but a dream within a dream within a dream. I see if it's mainstream, I probably won't go see it.
Philosopher.
Yeah, I usually do not, and not because if I go see a mainstream movie, it'd probably just be like something fun, like The Avengers or something cheesy like that. I usually watch like foreign films and independent stuff, and stuff that you have to read the subtitles, stuff you've never heard of. I'm a weirdo. What's that?
Sundance Films?
Right, the Sundance Con Film
You
Festival.
see The Cook, the Thief, the
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, cult classic. I think it's overrated, actually. All my friends are like, you gotta see it. It's the best movie since Clockwork.
It's kind of...
It's very violent.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very violent, very disturbing. Yeah, there's some very disturbing scenes. I think it's overrated, really. But yeah, of course I've seen it. It's on Netflix, man. I think you watch it. So yeah, but yeah. But so I've got this conundrum, right? Like, how do I know if I'm dreaming? How do I know if it's real or just an illusion? But Descartes sort of acquiesces. He says, well, look, okay, maybe it is all a dream. But even if it is all a dream, aren't there some things that I can't doubt still? Like, I know are true. So even if this is all a dream world that I'm in, aren't there some things that I'm seeing in my dream that I can't doubt? Like what? Well, let's read here, and then maybe you can tell me what he's saying. At the bottom there, 339, that first column. Well, suppose that I am dreaming. Suppose in particular that my eyes are not open, that my head is not moving, and that I have not put out my hand. Suppose that I don't even have hands or even a body. I must still admit that the things that I see in sleep are like painted images, which must have been patterned after real things, and hence that things like eyes, heads, hands, and bodies are real rather than imaginary. For even when painters try to give bizarre shapes to sirens or satyrs or these mythological figures, they're unable to give them completely new natures. They only jumble together the parts of various animals, right? Satyr, you take a boy and a goat, stick them together, right? And even if they're to come up with something so novel that no one had ever seen anything like it before, something entirely fictitious and unreal, at least there must be real colors from which they are composed. Similarly, while things like eyes, heads, and hands might be imaginary, it must be granted that some simpler and more universal things are real. The real colors from which the true and false images in our thoughts are formed. So even if I'm, acquiescing to this dream thought experiment, even if I'm saying, okay, well, it is all a dream, according to Descartes, I can still know that some things are real. Like what?
Like a tree's still a tree if you see it in your dream.
Well, okay, if I look at a tree, and if I see a tree and I'm dreaming, it might not actually be a real tree, but it's an image of a tree, and the image is real, right? I mean, the image is there. I can't doubt that I'm seeing it. So what is the image composed of?
Are we getting back to forms? Because this is what
What
it's
about
sounding like.
Close, yeah, because remember, Plato was a rationalist, okay? Descartes was as well, with he's got a little twist, not exactly the same as Plato, but yeah. Now he's saying these basic things, the building blocks, right? I could maybe even doubt that tree is real. I could even doubt that hands are real, or my body. But I can't doubt, if I'm dreaming, that colors are real. I'm seeing colors, different colors, they're there. Whether or not what they're portraying is real is for him irrelevant at this point. The colors themselves are real. The shapes, yeah.
What about daydreams?
Daydreams, well, again, that would be more like, I guess, a dream within a dream or something like that. I mean, if I'm daydreaming, what am I doing? I'm sitting there and my mind is somewhere else.
Is there like a philosophy of sleep thing? Sounding like there's probably.
Philosophy of sleep? No, maybe there could be, but some people do make a big deal about this dream thought experiment. A lot of phenomenologists, when we go to Unit 3, we'll talk about phenomenology. They argue that no, it's different. Sleeping and even you had a dream and when you're awake, it's different. When you're dreaming, you might not be able to tell, but there are certain factors, right, that are definitely going to be different, right? So, and I don't want to get into the details because it gets pretty complicated how they do this, right? But I don't know. Philosophy of dreams. I always have people asking me that, where I tell them I'm a philosophy major, or I teach philosophy. I go to a cocktail party and try to hit on some girl. Oh, your philosophy. Oh, I had a dream the other night. Could you interpret it for me? Or something like that. I'm like, no, it's psychology, and that's actually very outdated psychology that people don't really take serious anymore. But whatever. I think a lot of people get psychology and philosophy confused. But I think that's less annoying than if I was an astronomer and people started talking about astrology. I mean, oh my God, I'd be really ticked off about that. But so if I'm dreaming, though, Descartes says I still can't doubt shape. It's there. I can't doubt colors. They're real. What they depict might be fake. It might be an illusion, but I can't doubt the color or what he calls extension. That things have some extension to them. They have depth. I can't doubt those basic ideas. But what about mathematics? What about 2 + 2 = 4? Can't I know that for sure? At first he says, I think so, yeah. I mean, of course, yeah, 2 + 2 is still 4, even if I'm dreaming, right? Doesn't matter if I'm dreaming.
Square never has more than 4 sides.
Square never has more than 4 sides. I know these things, right? What's that?
Sounds like definitions.
Okay, good. We get to Hume. You'll like his exploration of these things. They're just relations of ideas. You're just defining things, and given the definition, true things will follow from the definition. But for Hume, you're not really saying anything about the actual world of experience. So you might like Hume when we get to him. But Descartes is going to say no. The building blocks are real, the shapes are real, the colors are real. Mathematics, I can be certain about. Or can I? Can I be certain that 2 plus 2 equals 4? At first he says yes, but then he says, well, couldn't God make it so that it wasn't? You know, God can do anything. God can make it that 2 plus 2 wasn't 4. But I'm being tricked into thinking that it is. And he's being careful here, right? He doesn't want to be a heretic or a blasphemer, so he says, well, God is good, and God wouldn't do that. So I'm not going to suppose that God would ever trick me into thinking that 2 plus 2 is 4 when it's not. But maybe God didn't do this, but who or what might have done this? What's that?
The devil or the
Yeah, he calls it, what is it? It's depending on what translation you get. Sometimes it's evil genius, sometimes it's evil demon. So what does it say here? I think it's the very end of the first meditation. So on page 340, evil demon is what you get in your translation. So at the bottom of 340, in that first column, so he's not going to suppose that God is tricking him, but let's suppose that, not that there's a supremely good God who is the source of all truth, but that there is an evil demon, supremely powerful and cunning, who works as hard as he can to deceive me. I will say that sky, air, earth, color, shape, sound, and all other external things are just dreamed illusions, and that the demon uses these to ensnare my judgment. I will regard myself as not having hands, not having eyes, flesh, blood, and senses, but as having the false belief that I do have all of these things. I will obstinately concentrate on this meditation and will thus ensure, by mental resolution, that if I do not really have the ability to know the truth, I will at least withhold my assent from what is false and from what a deceiver may try to put over on me, however powerful and cunning he may be. But this plan requires effort, and laziness brings me back to my ordinary life. I'm like a prisoner who happens to enjoy the illusion of freedom in his dreams, and begins to suspect that he is asleep, fears being awakened, and deliberately lets the enticing illusion slip by unchallenged. Thus I slide back into my old views, afraid to awaken, and to find that after my peaceful rest I must toil, not in the light, but in the confusing darkness of the problems just raised. What are the problems that are just raised? If he comes up with this hypothesis, maybe there's an evil demon who's deceiving me at all times. What sort of problems does that pose? If all that I see, all that I experience is just an illusion created by this evil genius, or evil demon, well, what follows from that? What can I know? Can I be sure of anything? I've pretty much thrown all knowledge out, right? I mean, there's one thing I can know. We'll get to that in a minute, for sure. I always know this. But I don't know if my body's real. I don't know if you guys are real, right? I could just be up here. I think I'm giving a lecture on Descartes, but in reality, I'm just the brain of that or something on some planet off Alpha Centauri with electrodes into my brain. And this evil genius is just shooting experiences into my head. But none of them are real, right? If that's the case, what can I know? Where's my knowledge? I can't really know anything. I've lost everything. I'm in this point, I've reached this point of extreme skepticism, what you might call global skepticism. If the evil demon, if that hypothesis is true, then I'm able to doubt everything. Well, except for at least one thing. And then we'll get to that in a second, right? I can doubt my body, I can doubt all of you, maybe we're all just a bunch of robots that just look real and act real, but in reality it's all just a dream or just an illusion that this evil demon has created for me. And so we've got a problem here, right? We've got a problem. When we get to the second meditation, though, he doesn't immediately resolve this problem. It takes him a while to get to it. It's sort of a roundabout way that he does this, and I've always been kind of confused with the order that he takes in the meditations, right? He seems not to really address this problem of skepticism right at the bat, but the first thing he does is he really provides us with an argument for why rationalism is the answer, why our knowledge is based on reason, not on our experience. And this is where we get the famous wax example, right? Wait a minute, I spoke wrong. It's not the skepticism that he ignores, it's solipsism, which I haven't even mentioned yet, right? But we have to get to the Coquito first before I really talk about solipsism. Now, Coquito, this is Latin. Descartes was writing in Latin. The Coquito, actually, this is the one thing that he can know for sure, even if the evil genius is true. Even if he accepts that global skepticism, I can doubt everything, but there's one thing that I can never doubt. What's that? What can I never doubt?
Coquito ergo sum. Is that what you're referring to?
Coquito ergo sum, or sum, if you want to say that. It's fine. Ergo sum. Coquito ergo sum, what does this mean?
I think, therefore I am.
I think, Coquito, therefore I am. Okay? How does he know that? If there's an evil genius deceiving him, how can he know this? I know that I exist. Well, how? How do you know that?
Through his mind.
Good.
The mind is the main.
Well, what is he doing right now? He's thinking, right? Or he's doubting, or whatever. Could he think or doubt if he didn't exist? No, he says. It's impossible. So that's one thing I can hold on to. That's one thing I can latch on to. I might be able to doubt everything else, but one thing I can never, ever, ever doubt is my own existence. The fact that I'm doubting proves that I'm here. The fact that even if I'm being deceived, I have to be here to be deceived, right? Let's read the second full paragraph there of Meditations, the second meditation. Actually, the third full paragraph, right? How do I know that there isn't something different from the things just listed that I do not have the slightest reason to doubt? Isn't there a God or something like one who puts my thoughts into me? But why should I say that when I may be the author of those thoughts? Well, isn't it at least the case that I am something? But now I'm denying that I have senses and a body. But I stop here. For what follows from these determinations, or from these denials, am I so bound to my body and to my senses that I cannot exist without them? I've convinced myself that there is nothing in the world. No sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Doesn't it follow that I don't exist? No. Surely I must exist if it's me who is convinced of something. But there is a deceiver, supremely powerful and cunning, whose aim is to see that I'm always deceived. But surely I exist if I am deceived. Let him deceive me all he can. He will never make it the case that I am nothing, while I think that I am something. Thus, having fully weighed every consideration, I must finally conclude that the statement I exist, must be true whenever I state it or mentally consider it. So the one thing that can never be taken away is the certainty of my own existence. The Coquito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. Probably the most widely quoted phrase. But we've got a problem here, though. Not just the lack of knowledge. Okay, well, I know that I exist. That's it. That's not a lot of knowledge to deal with. I want to know more than that, right? So we still got a bit of a skeptical problem here. We've also got the problem of solipsism now. Because what's on the list of the things that he denies, right? I can doubt that, let's see here. I've convinced myself that there's nothing in the world. No sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. There's something on that list that's very particular, very peculiar. Most of the things he's denying are things that I can see, that I can touch, that I can feel or smell, I can get at through my senses. But there's something on the list that isn't like that, yet I still think it exists. In fact, there's quite a few of them in here that I'm assuming exist. All of you have one. A mind, right? How do I know that you have a mind? Well, I don't, says Descartes. At this point, right? And this is solipsism, right? That view that all I can know for sure is that my own mind exists. For all I know, there are no other minds out there, right? That's solipsism. And most philosophers want to avoid it, right? We want to say that we know there's other minds out there, right? Don't we? Well, how? How do we know? I can't see your mind. Can't jump into your head and think about things with your mind. So how do I prove that other people's minds are out there, that there are other Coquitos in the world? Well, he doesn't really address this problem, like I said. He kind of waits till the end of the meditations. He gives us his proofs for God's existence, and he thinks that, God would never fool us, and so that's kind of why the evil genius would go away. If God exists, he wouldn't let this deception occur. And as long as I use reason, and reason tells me that other people are in the world, I don't have to worry about all these problems, right? Maybe that's kind of a weak correction, or that's a really weak response, but it's his response nonetheless. But now we get to the wax example, right? This is where he takes the piece of wax and he tries to demonstrate his rationalist epistemology, his rationalist epistemology, right? I know I am here, I exist, right? But what am I? How does he define the I, the cogito, the I don't know, what do you say in Spanish, yo, or in French? Somebody's taking French in here, right? Or this is my other class. Or ish. What is this? What is the I? What does he call it? First he says, well, maybe it's a rational animal, but I don't like that because then I have to define animal and reason. What is the I? Well, what does it do? What is it doing right now? What is his ego doing right now? He's thinking, okay? And it's a thing, so it's a thing that thinks. It's a thinking thing. Wow, how deep, okay? The cogito, he says, is a thinking thing. What does that entail? A thinking thing entails, he thinks, a lot of things. It means that the thinking thing can doubt. He's doubting right now. It can understand things or misunderstand things. It can affirm. It can deny. He says that it can will or refuse to will, but I think he's not thinking as rigorously as he should. If the evil genius is still pulling the strings, maybe I think I have free will, but in reality, it's just an illusion. So I don't even think he can really assert this, right? But obviously the thinking thing has sensory perceptions, right? It has an imagination, and so he thinks all of this is true even if there is an evil genius. But wait a minute, right? If the I is the thing that I'm most certain of, right? The cogito is the thing I'm most certain of. What about the other things, like my body, right? My body, he says, is something distinct from my mind or my soul. And he says it seems on first view that we have a more distinctive grasp on the things that are uncertain, like our body. We have a more clear picture or understanding of these uncertain things than we do of the certain things. That's problematic. Well, think about it. If I asked you guys to go home and write a descriptive paragraph, you have to write as much detail as possible. It has to be at least 2 or 3 pages. Write a descriptive paragraph either about the body or the I, or the ego, or whatever you call it, like the yo, the je, the ish. Which one would be easier to write? The body, of course. Get out your anatomy and physiology book. Just go to town. You've got all sorts of things you could say about the body, all these characteristics it has. But this, kind of an empty, vague concept, right? Not much content there. So, again, this is a bit of a problem. It seems that I have more of a grasp on these uncertain things, physical things, than I do on the certain ones, okay? Now we get to the wax example, finally, okay? This is page 342, close to the bottom. It's that last paragraph in the first column. He's taking a physical object and he's showing us how I can have knowledge of it, right? Even though it's a physical thing, and it's existence is not certain, I can have certain knowledge about it. And he also wants to say and prove that knowledge that I have of the wax, or of any physical thing, that knowledge comes from my ability to reason. It doesn't come from my senses. Okay? So
he says the knowledge of the wax comes from my ability
to reason, to think about the wax, to understand the wax, my faculty of reasoning comes from my mind. So that's his rationalism right there. My knowledge of the wax doesn't come from my senses. So how does he prove this? How does this example work? Let's read here on 342 there. He says, so let's consider the things that are commonly taken to be the most distinctly comprehended, that is, physical objects that we see and touch. So these things seem to be, we're very familiar with them, they're very distinct, there's no sort of gray area. Look, this is a desk, that's a desk, how hard is it to understand that? Well, let's consider one particular object, right? Because what does he say? General conceptions are often very confusing. So let's just take, for example, a piece of wax, right? One particular type of physical object. It's just been taken from the honeycomb, so it hasn't yet completely lost the taste of honey. It still smells of the flowers from which it was gathered. Its color, its shape, and size are obvious. It is hard, cold, and easy to touch, and it makes a sound when it's wrapped. In short, everything seems to be present in the wax that is required for me to know it as distinctly as possible. But as I speak, I move the wax toward the fire. It loses what was left of its taste. It gives up its smell. It changes color. It loses its shape. It gets bigger. It melts. It heats up. It becomes difficult to touch. It no longer makes a sound when I strike it. Is it still the same piece of wax? We must say that it is. We must say it is. No one will deny this. But what is it in the wax? Right? What is it? That allowed me to comprehend it so distinctly? Was it the senses? No, he says. Certainly, he says. Nothing that I reach with my senses allowed me to have this understanding. Why not? Well, everything having to do with taste, smell, sight, touch, and hearing, 5 senses, all of those have changed. And yet the same piece of wax remains. So why does he say that the senses cannot be the origin of my knowledge for the wax? Why can't my senses account for my knowledge of the wax?
Your senses change.
Right, well, what my senses see changes, right? So I have this piece of wax, it has a certain shape, color, whatever, and then I put it next to the fire. All of those qualities change, and yet I know it's still the same object. It's just gone through a change. If I just had the senses and not my understanding to sort of pull these all together, what would I have to say about it?
It's a whole completely different.
It's a different thing. In fact, I'd probably have to name it something different every change it made, right? It's wax, it's kerplax, it's come of wax, a different name, right, for each different shape, right? So that knowledge of the wax could not have come from my senses, right, he thinks. It must have come through my understanding, my ability to reason and connect all of these changes together, right? How much time we got left, guys?
It's after 9:40.
Oh, that's where we're supposed to stop, isn't it? Oh, geez. Okay. So the wax example again. We'll walk through this again next time. He's trying to demonstrate his rationalism here, right? My knowledge of the wax could not have come from my senses, and next time we'll see he also argues that it couldn't have come from my ability to imagine things either. It didn't come from my imagination. So apparently there's something different between imagination and reason, right? And we'll go over that next time, and we'll finish up Descartes. I would get a good start on Hume, though. Your paper will not be due until a week from today, but you might want to at least get a good head start on the Hume reading, because we will start it next class. Okay, guys, thanks a lot. Have a good weekend. If you